if someone is binge eating, that tells me that they are consistently abandoning their body. And when you get into a habit of consistently abandoning your body through food, you likely do that in other ways too, through people pleasing, through not honoring your boundaries, maybe like just code switching, like changing your personality depending on who you're with. Like all of those things abandon the core self. And so a lot of what I do is self-intimacy, helping people get back into their body. And then from that embodied place, it becomes really easy to sustainably eat well, because if you're feeling your body, you're going to know what foods feel like pleasure.
Welcome to the Tea On, where we sip tea and we talk about things, preferably things that matter. If you don't have tea, no worries. Love it. We love the mug.
I came prepared.
It's the aesthetic for me. And I am incredibly excited to have this conversation today because, and like I was saying before we started recording, was that this is something that's kind of hitting near and dear to my personal life right now. And I try to have the most authentic conversation that I possibly can on my platform. And so if I know that I'm in a place where I'm struggling with my anything, and in this particular conversation, my relationship with eating, then I want to have some healing be done publicly to give permission for those who may feel similarly and may want to also, I don't know, just get more intentional with their relationship with food and their bodies. So I'm here with Miss Lacou, who is a pleasure eating coach, you say, yes?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm definitely going to give you a space to introduce yourself. But when I found you on Instagram, I was just so enamored by the way that you approach eating in a way that connects us with the fact that we deserve to enjoy food and we deserve to honor it and hold it in a sacred space. So that really emotionally touched me, because sometimes with some practitioners, you can feel like it's very like boxed in or almost aggressive in the way that they approach curing or eating. So for you, I felt like it was very empowering. And so I'm so grateful to have you on my platform. So go ahead and let the people know who you are.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me, Jasmine.
Of course.
My name is Lacou Flipse, and I'm a pleasure eating coach. I've been in the nutrition sort of space for about 8 or 9 years now, and that feels like such a long time. And I started out as a nutritionist, and I noticed that wasn't really, I have a background in dietetics, and I just immediately went into applying those skills to one-on-one clients, and I just noticed it wasn't getting the long-term results that I wanted. And people come to me specifically to lose weight fast, and something about it like rubbed me the wrong way, even though that was what I was taught in school. So I did that for a couple years, and then I slowly progressed more into the coaching field and gave less and less nutrition advice and support and more lifestyle approach. And as I started transitioning more into lifestyle, things got a lot more successful. Clients were happier. They're actually losing weight and keeping it off. And throughout the years, I've come to realize that motivation is a huge thing for people. And I found that pleasure is like a phenomenal thing to keep people motivated, because we love to feel good, right? And most people think that they're eating for pleasure when they're overeating. So I kind of reverse engineered that and use pleasure as a motivator. So that's where I evolved my practice into pleasure eating.
I love it. And it I don't know, it gives me permission to feel deserving of enjoying food. I think that we can, if we get very conformative with it, we can get into a space where, food is, I don't know, it's a chore, and it loses the enjoyment. So I think it's really important that we step into that space. And I'm so grateful that you shifted and that you are honoring that. And so the first question I have for you is, You know, because, and I think this is often how like binge eating manifests, but it's this notion that like sometimes it isn't sustainable to find a healthy routine in relationship. So, or just with eating. So what would you say is like the best way to approach balanced eating in a way that is long lasting and sustainable?
Yeah, I think you're touching on something really profound, which is that there's this sustainability factor with a lot of behavioral change. Like, it's really hard to keep people motivated in the long term. So the first thing I would do with a client is which surprises a lot of people, like a lot of people start working with me and they're like, yes, I'm gonna learn what to eat now, and like this coach is gonna whip me into shape. And I don't do none of that. I'm just like, how are you feeling? Like, let's get you into your body. Because if someone is binge eating, that tells me that they are consistently abandoning their body. And when you get into a habit of consistently abandoning your body through food, you likely do that in other ways too, through people pleasing, through not honoring your boundaries, maybe like just code switching, like changing your personality depending on who you're with. Like, all of those things abandon the core self. And so a lot of what I do is self-intimacy, helping people get back into their body. And then from that embodied place, it becomes really easy to sustainably eat well, because if you're feeling your body, you're going to know what foods feel like pleasure. And I have this thing called authentic pleasure and inauthentic pleasure. Inauthentic pleasure doesn't feel good before, during, and after. And authentic pleasure feels good throughout, and you get excited about what you want to eat. There's no fear or like hesitation. During, you feel like, ooh, if it's a treat, you honor it and you own it as a treat. If it's something that's like super nourishing, you're like feeling to that as well. And then after, you surrender to it, you let it go. There's no obsessing, there's no, oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. And so there's a process to it. It's an approach. And when you're in the body, you can feel what feels like pleasure. You can feel the subtleties of it. And it can be really subtle. Like, for example, let's say someone was eating a sandwich, and two women eat a sandwich. They both eat the same sandwich. One woman eats it and she's eating it for authentic pleasure. They both are eating the same sandwich, and maybe it looks like they both are healthy. But on the inside, one woman might be thinking like, oh, how am I going to burn this off? This has too much mayo on it. Or like, I shouldn't be eating this bread because there's like so many carbs in the sandwich. And then the other woman is just fully enjoying that experience. So afterwards, she feels good in her body, instead of like this mental flagellation that happens when we eat foods that are quote unquote pleasurable. So if you get into your body, develop self-intimacy, over time you will know what foods feel like pleasure, and there won't be like a lot of mental gymnastics that happens for a lot of people when they approach healthy eating, because there's a lot of self-flagellation happening that kind of beats us down, and then when you're in that beat down place, it's when people want to reach for food. So really honoring the body, I think, the first thing, and like the main thing for sustainable, healthy eating.
Seeing yourself as sacred, I would say. That's, oh my God, you kind of low-key just blew my mind. And you touched on something that I really would love to expand on, which is like the connection between what is going on in ourselves emotionally and spiritually in relation to how we eat. And so I'm curious to know if there is, because I think in any sort of healing, right, it's important that we look at the underlying root cause of it. You know, if you're attracting a lot of, maybe unhealthy relationships, looking at what's going on within that's causing that. And so I say that to say that, when you meet with people who, deal with restrictive eating or overeating or binging or whatever the case may be, you know, what is the common underlying factor that you find? And second part is it ever something that's like societally ingested? Because I found that in my own experience, I would say.
What do you mean by societally ingested?
Just like, I think maybe just because, right, we can have beliefs about ourselves, but then we can also be responding to expectation, whether it's societal expectation or like expectation
fitting yourself.
Yeah, just, you know, yeah. Whatever the case may be. And I may be off about it, but I wonder how many people are mistreating their own body simply because they're trying to fit into a mold that they don't even are, like, they're not even connected to. If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Like, I see that all the time.
Right.
People who work with me, I work with a spectrum of people. Some people who are in the anti-diet community and have, you know, maybe a history of binge eating, and it was perpetuated by dieting and trying to restrict and lose weight, and it would just like boomerang. So I've worked with people who are in that community who have been like, you know, free of diets for a number of years, but they still find themselves binge eating. And I also work with people who have done the intuitive eating route and that didn't work for them, and people who are like on strict diets and trying to get them to come to more like embodied approach to eating. Mm-hmm. And I would say most people, you know, most women are taught to seek external validation, and because of that, a lot of women like don't love their bodies, and it's kind of like we're trained to be that way because it sells stuff, you know.
Yeah. Oh my god.
So what I like to do is teach people to come from a place of inner consent. And what I mean by that is validating yourself. Like, get in the habit of validating yourself, your own worth, and eating in a way that's on your terms and not someone else's terms. Because diet, you know, they're essentially like what someone else thinks that you should eat. And so people end up shitting themselves and they're like, oh, I should be able to eat how so-and-so is eating. But really that's another way of abandoning the body, because the body has its own way of eating.
Yes.
And so yeah, coming back to that inner consent and just creating a relationship with our inner voice, which is the voice of the body, that tells us all the time throughout the day, like how we can eat and how we can show up to food that is in alignment with our authentic self.
Amazing. Totally. Inner consent. I've never even really like marinated on that idea, but I love that, and I thank you for bringing that up. And yeah, that really resonated with me, especially the terms of like women being taught to seek external validation. I think connecting with the self is connecting with what fulfillment looks like to you and what validation really authentically means to you. So that's
right. Yeah, and the other thing is, yeah, go for it.
I was just gonna say it's important to put the power back in our hands, but continue.
Yeah, totally. And the other element is like women are often taught in like our puritanical society that pleasure is bad. Right. So I get a lot of women who are actually ashamed of putting themselves first because they associate that to pleasure.
Right.
And in a culture, so a lot of like as you're probably starting to see, like the relationship with food is really like this holistic thing that, you know, we get the societal conditioning, we get like what we get from our parents, we get programming, we get all this stuff that you kind of have to sift through to find your truth, to connect with your inner consent, because this is why so many people are overwhelmed with how and what to eat, because there's so much external noise out there, and we're not really taught how to connect with ourselves and listen to that voice in terms of how to eat and how to show up in relationships.
Right.
A really consistent theme I see is like the relationship with food reflecting the relationship that someone has with life.
Wow.
So if someone is really anxious, or if someone is really avoidant, if someone doesn't face the difficulties and challenges of life, they likely will turn to food for comfort. So food being used as a coping mechanism, as like this external regulating body, because we're all doing our best. Like we're all just trying to regulate and be like normal, productive people. And for some people, like my clients and like my past self, we've used food to regulate our discomforts in life. And that can be feeling anxious and wanting to not feel anxious. It could be feeling like this needs aren't being met because you're not speaking up, and like food becomes the only safe place for you to just be. So if people are not showing their authenticity to the world, that can create this like compensatory relationship with food. So I guess like the biggest pattern I've seen is just like food being used as a coping tool and a way of balancing out our relationship to life.
Right, exactly. It's all connected, it's all interweaved, and it's so mind-blowing because it's like if you're offset in one area, it's going to reflect everywhere else. And so it's important that we recognize that. That's incredible. And so with, pleasure eating being such like the base and foundation of what it is that you do, I'm curious to know if there is a certain like maybe percentage or a different set of value when it comes to eating foods that nourish our health and like foods that nourish just our soul, like what would be labeled as treats. Is there a method to the madness in terms of like, treats should be secondary and wellness is first, or is it just interrelated?
That's a really good question. And I would say that it looks different for everyone. So I can use myself as an example. I don't follow like a specific way of eating. Like I eat all foods, and I used to have a big sweet tooth, but not anymore. I prefer like more fruits and vegetables now. But I do eat chocolate like almost every day.
Love that.
And that way that I balance that out is by like just feeling into what my body wants in that day, like how much chocolate, what kind of chocolate, and getting really specific about it. And so how I'd answer that question is by trusting the body. Like over time, you'll come to know, like it will be scary in the beginning to just allow all foods and just kind of tuning into what the body wants in each moment. But over time, you'll get to a refinement to where it's not a balance. So I look at it's not imbalance. So when people start first working with me, they might have a more like imbalanced approach because they're binging a lot.
Right.
But the way that I work through the pleasure eating process, like we use each experience with food as an opportunity to understand what your food needs are. And for me, I really enjoy chocolate, so it's one of my food needs, and I make sure I have it every day. But on top of that, like my body is just so tuned in to what I require that I notice I also eat tons of fruits and vegetables. I eat a lot of grains, and I know that I'm balanced not by what I eat, but by how I feel. And if I'm ever not feeling good, I'm like, oh, okay, like how have I been eating? Like, what is my body trying to tell me?
Wow.
A couple weeks ago I had coffee, and I don't normally have coffee, and I could feel the difference in my system. Like I started craving carbs more than I normally do. And so having this like really fine-tuned and intimate connection with the body allows you to understand like what your food drives are on that particular day.
It's from what I'm gathering, it's just having a consistent conversation with self and having an honest conversation with self, you know?
Yeah, and in order to have an honest conversation with self, like we really can't shame ourselves for our desires. Because if I were to shame myself for wanting to have chocolate every day, I would feel bad about it and then beat myself up and then probably end up binging on chocolate or something else.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oof, been there. Which is crazy because I feel the same way about chocolate. But mind you, I allow myself dark chocolate every single day, and it's important that you nourish the soul. It's important that you give yourself that space. I totally I resonate so deeply. And so go ahead.
The other thing I forgot to mention is that when it comes to balance, like with food, in order to be able to show up authentically to food and like really hear that inner voice, we have to have like balance in our life. So for example, I just finished up my first course, and I was working like 12-hour days to get that course done. And I noticed, because there was this great imbalance in my life, that I was craving more foods for comfort. And so if we aren't like balancing out our pleasure in our life, I wasn't doing my usual like pleasure activities, things that bring me pleasure outside of food. So food kind of became it became more enticing because I wasn't balancing out the pleasure in my life.
Yeah. Oh, I totally notice when I'm overworked what that means for me in terms of my hunger, and if I'm not getting an adequate amount of sleep, which I think is more well known. But like if I'm not getting my usual like 9 or 8 and instead 5, I'm like the whole rest of the day I'm craving food. So yeah, it's totally a thing. I'm learning so much just by hearing you. It's amazing. And so the last question that I have that I think is really important is that how do we normalize prioritizing our relationship with food? And I ask that because I think, and I'm certainly sure that there are a lot of women especially, and men of course, but there are a lot of people out there who aren't even aware of the fact that they may be suffering with some sort of eating disorder. I think that there's such a surface level understanding of what an eating disorder is, that a lot of people don't realize the different shades that it can come in and how it may be playing out in their lives. And so how do we have this be a normal way of conversation? You know, how is this form of healing better accepted?
That's so true. I think it's sometimes I associate like diet culture and even anti-diet culture as being trapped in the matrix, because it's just so deep. You know, there's programming, there's conditioning, there's like what your friends are telling you, there's like all the stuff on Instagram, all the media. So kind of like what I said in the beginning, like you really have to be able to cut through the noise and develop a relationship to your body. And allow that to become the authority, because for so many people, the authority is whoever is promoting nutrition or what to eat on Instagram. Even in, you know, my school, I have a science degree in nutrition, and even there, our research was 7 years old. So when I graduated, all of the studies, I had to like do research on all the studies because they were antiquated by then. So what we're finding out about nutrition is always changing. And so the one thing that is consistent is our connection to ourselves. So prioritizing that over anything else and checking everything that we hear from the external in with our inner consent is, I think, the way to really normalize this way of approaching the world, really.
100%.
Yeah.
And I know I said that was the last question, but this just came up that I really just, out of my own like personal sheer curiosity,
Yeah.
I am curious to know what your viewpoint is on, because obviously you were saying about how your studies seemed antiquated, even though it technically, you know, in a service of science, 7 years wouldn't be that much, but especially in this field, it absolutely is. And it wouldn't have taken into account the role that social media plays. And especially on that, the role that like the wellness community on social media plays. So I'm curious to know just like your outlook on it, because I think in the beginning I found a lot of comfort being part of the wellness community on Instagram, and then slowly, like as I unplugged from the matrix, I kind of saw the toxicity in it. So I'm curious to know if you see that, or if you think, you know, it still plays a divine role.
The role of like Instagram and the wellness community?
Just, yeah, not even just Instagram, because I think social media, obviously what that's done for body image is broken beyond return, but more so like nutritionists that are on Instagram and like they're posting those like eye-catching pictures of like how much grains and greens should be on your plate, and you know, like those kinds of things, which like I said serve a divine purpose, but I think it can also I don't know, there's a weird space there.
I think that stuff is all good. Like, it's good to know the research.
Right.
I think what happens where the research fails is that it's kind of trying to apply, you know, controlled studies to people's lives, and that doesn't really work, you know. And then people try to apply, maybe they get into their mind like, I have to eat this way because it's like balanced or it's what this nutritionist said, mm-hmm. And if they don't, they beat themselves up. So I think those how we approach nutrition needs to be also like, we need to also like approach like the inner work just as seriously as we're approaching eating a healthy, balanced diet. And again, like checking and making sure that everything is coming through our inner consent, because even though it's recommended that like, what is it, like a quarter of our plate be protein, a quarter of our plate be carbohydrates, and then half the plate fruits and vegetables, like it's really good. But maybe some people don't really do well with that much protein. Maybe some people do well with a little less vegetables and fruits. Right. Maybe some people do well with less carbs.
Yeah.
I think like where research and nutrition kind of fails is that a lot of people adopt those things without actually testing or giving themselves time to really integrate those practices and principles.
Yeah, 100%. I love what you said about like there are controlled ways of operating, and how can that fall in line with individual and specific lives. I think that's imperative. I think, and I especially saw that with like the boom of veganism and how everybody was like, okay, well now I am vegan. And while of course I understand completely the benefits of following a raw diet, I also understand that like that may not work as well with every single person. And just because it's become this like fad, you know, I don't know, we're individuals and we can't escape the inner work basically to keep
yeah. I also see like a lot of people getting into veganism to lose weight, and if that's like the main driver, then it's like, no, it's not going to be a long-term change.
No. If it's because you want to, you know, pour health into your relationship with the earth, then I get it, queen. You know, it's to lose weight. First of all, you can I had friends who have gone vegan and gained weight because there's like there's a lot of ways to do it. But anyway,
I see how that's. Yeah, I think like approaching any nutrition nutritional approach to life, like integrating any type of nutritional approach to life, like if it's done just from a lens of trying to lose weight, it's just going to turn into a diet. And we all know how that goes.
Yep. Sure do. Sure do. So yeah, 100%. You have bestowed such wisdom upon me, and you do so in such a safe and understanding and human level manner. And I appreciate you so much for lending your voice to this platform and for really, I mean, you've helped whoever's decided that they are honoring themselves by listening, but also you just helped me because this is something that I really have been wanting to be more intentional with. And so I thank you, and let the people know where they can find you and how they can work with you.
You can find me at enlightenmunch.com and Lacou Flipse on Instagram. And yeah, I have a course that's starting. My course is starting again in January on the 11th. And if you're interested,
111.
Yeah.
Love that.
Very auspicious time. And if you're interested in that, you can hit the link on my Instagram or book a taster session through my website.
Absolutely. I highly recommend we do it. And otherwise, yeah, thank you again. And for anyone watching, honor yourself, honor your body, do the inner work, and it'll be reflective in every other area of your life. Clearly, we can't escape it. The shadow work, the inner child work, all of it. It all matters. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah.